The Passover Seder is a Jewish ritual feast that marks the beginning of the Jewish holiday of Passover. It is conducted on the evening of the 15th day of Nisan in the Hebrew calendar throughout the world. This corresponds to late March or April in the Gregorian calendar. Passover lasts for 7 days in Israel and 8 days outside of Israel, with Jews outside of Israel other than Reform Jews holding 2 Seders and Jews in Israel and Reform Jews worldwide holding 1 Seder. The Seder is a ritual performed by a community or by multiple generations of a family, involving a retelling of the story of the liberation of the Israelites from slavery in ancient Egypt. This story is in the book of Exodus in the Hebrew Bible. The Seder itself is based on the biblical verse commanding Jews to retell the story of the Exodus from Egypt. You shall tell your child on that day, saying, it is because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. Traditionally, families and friends gather in the evening to read the text of the Haggadah, an ancient work derived from the Mishnah. The Haggadah contains the narrative of the Israelite exodus from Egypt, special blessings and rituals, commentaries from the Talmud, and special Passover songs. Seder customs include telling the story, discussing the story, drinking 4 cups of wine, eating matzah, partaking of symbolic foods placed on the Passover Seder plate, and reclining in celebration of freedom. The Seder is performed in much the same way by Jews all over the world. Overview: Kaddish GHz copyright a recital of Kiddush blessing and drinking of the first cup of wine, Urcharts K, Yen the washing of the hands, Karpas Ka dipping of the karpas in salt water, Yeshart's unregistered trademark, Yen breaking the middle matzo. The larger piece becomes the afikoman, Magid unregistered trademark retelling the Passover story, including the recital of the 4 questions, and drinking of the second cup of wine, Rachzarke, a second washing of the hands, Motzi unregistered trademark, Matzo blessing before eating matzo, Marke eating of the ma, Kriak Keish eating of a sandwich made of matzo and ma, Shulchan Arik Ka, Y Keish litzet table the serving of the holiday meal. Zafan y eating of the afikoman, Bariak. Keish blessing after the meal and drinking of the 3rd cup of wine, Hillel recital of the Hillel, traditionally recited on festivals. Drinking of the 4th cup of wine, Nertzah unregistered trademark Ka say next year in Jerusalem. While many Jewish holidays revolve around the synagogue, the Seder is conducted in the family home, although communal Seders are also organized by synagogues, schools and community centers, some open to the general public. It is customary to invite guests, especially strangers and the needy. The Seder is integral to Jewish faith and identity, as explained in the Haggadah. If not for divine intervention in the Exodus, the Jewish people would still be slaves in Egypt. Therefore, the Seder is an occasion for praise and thanksgiving and for rededication to the idea of liberation. Furthermore, the words and rituals of the Seder are a primary vehicle for the transmission of the Jewish faith from grandparent to child, and from one generation to the next. Attending a Seder and eating matzah on Passover is a widespread custom in the Jewish community, even among those who are not religiously observant. The Seder table is traditionally set with the finest place settings and silverware, and family members come to the table dressed in their holiday clothes. There is a tradition for the person leading the Seder to wear a white robe called a kittel. For the first half of the Seder, each participant will only need a plate and a wine glass. At the head of the table is a Seder plate containing various symbolic foods that will be eaten or pointed out during the course of the Seder. Placed nearby is a plate with 3 matzot and dishes of salt water for dipping. Each participant receives a copy of the Haggadah, which is often a traditional version, an ancient text that contains the complete Seder service. Men and women are equally obliged and eligible to participate in the Seder. In many homes, each participant at the Seder table will recite at least critical parts of the Haggadah in the original Hebrew and Aramaic. Halakha requires that certain parts be said in language the participants can understand, and critical parts are often said in both Hebrew and the native language. The leader will often interrupt the reading to discuss different points with his or her children, or to offer a Torah insight into the meaning or interpretation of the words. In some homes, Participants take turns reciting the text of the Haggadah, in the original Hebrew or in translation. It is traditional for the head of the household and other participants to have pillows placed behind them for added comfort. At several points during the Seder, participants lean to the left, when drinking the 4 cups of wine, eating the afikoman, and eating the korach sandwich. Jews generally observe 1 or 2 Seders. In Israel, 1 Seder is observed on the first night of Passover. Many diaspora communities, sometimes excluding Reform and Reconstructionist Jews, hold a Seder also on the second night. Seders have been observed around the world, including in remote places such as high in the Himalaya Mountains and Kathmandu, Nepal. Themes of the Seder = slavery and freedom =. The rituals and symbolic foods evoke the twin themes of the evening, slavery and freedom. The rendering of time for the Hebrews was that a day began at sunset and ended at sunset. Historically, at the beginning of the 15th of Nisan in ancient Egypt, the Jewish people were enslaved to Pharaoh. After the 10th plague struck Egypt at midnight, killing all the firstborn sons from the firstborn of Pharaoh to the firstborn of the lowest Egyptian to all the firstborn of the livestock in the land, Pharaoh let the Hebrew nation go, effectively making them free people for the second half of the night. Thus, Seder participants recall the slavery that reigned during the first half of the night by eating matzo, and caroset. Recalling the freedom of the second half of the night, they eat the matzo and afikoman, and drink the 4 cups of wine, in a reclining position, and dip vegetables into salt water. The 4 cups there is an obligation to drink 4 cups of wine during the Seder. The Mishnah says that even the poor are obliged to drink the 4 cups. Each cup is imbibed at a specific point in the Seder. The first is for Kiddush, the second is for Magid, the third is for Birkat Hamazon and the fourth is for Hallel. The 4 cups represent the 4 expressions of deliverance promised by God. Exodus 6:6-7, I will bring out, I will deliver, I will redeem, and I will take. The Vilna again relates the 4 cups to 4 worlds, this world, the Messianic age, the world at the revival of the dead, and the world to come. The Maharal connects them to the 4 matriarchs, Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah. At-Barbain relates the cups to the 4 historical redemptions of the Jewish people, the choosing of Abraham, the exodus from Egypt, the survival of the Jewish people throughout the exile, and the 4th which will happen at the end of days. The 4 cups might also reflect the Roman custom of drinking as many cups as there are letters in the name of the chief guest at a meal, which in the case of the Seder is God himself whose Hebrew name has 4 letters. Seder plate The Passover Seder plate is a special plate containing 6 symbolic foods used during the Passover Seder. Each of the 6 items arranged on the plate has special significance to the retelling of the story of the Exodus from Egypt. The 7th symbolic item used during the meal a stack of 3 matzot is placed on its own plate on the Seder table. The 6 items on the Seder plate are, mar and chazeret, 2 types of bitter herbs, symbolizing the bitterness and harshness of the slavery which the Jews endured in ancient Egypt. For mar, many people use freshly grated horseradish or whole horseradish root. Chazeret is typically romaine lettuce, whose roots are bitter-tasting. Either the horseradish or romaine lettuce may be eaten in fulfillment of the mitzvah of eating bitter herbs during the Seder. Caroset, a sweet, brown, pebbly paste of fruits and nuts, representing the mortar used by the Jewish slaves to build the storehouses of Egypt. Kapers, a vegetable other than bitter herbs, usually parsley but sometimes something such as celery or cooked potato, which is dipped into salt water, vinegar, or caroset at the beginning of the Seder. Zeroah, a roasted lamb or goat bone, symbolizing the korban pesach, which was a lamb offered in the temple in Jerusalem and was then roasted and eaten as part of the meal on Seder night. Bitza, a hard-boiled egg, symbolizing the korban chagiga that was offered in the temple in Jerusalem and was then eaten as part of the meal on Seder night. Focus on the children since the retelling of the Exodus to one's child is the object of the Seder experience, much effort is made to arouse the interest and curiosity of the children and keep them awake during the meal. To that end, Questions and answers are a central device in the Seder ritual. By encouraging children to ask questions, they will be more open to hearing the answers. The most famous question which the youngest child asks at the Seder is the Ma Nishtana, why is this night different from all other nights? After the asking of these questions, the main portion of the Seder, Majid, gives over the answers in the form of a historical review. Also, at different points in the Seder, the leader of the Seder will cover the matzot and lift their cup of wine. Then put down the cup of wine and uncover the matzot all to elicit questions from the children. In Sephardic tradition, the questions are asked by the assembled company in chorus rather than by a child, and are put to the leader of the Seder, who either answers the question or may direct the attention of the assembled company to someone who is acting out that particular part of the Exodus. Physical reenactment of the Exodus during the Passover Seder is common in many families and communities, especially amongst Sephardim. Families will follow the Haggadah's lead by asking their own questions at various points in the Haggadah and offering prizes such as nuts and candies for correct answers. The afikoman, which is hidden away for the dessert after the meal, is another device used to encourage children's participation. In some families, the leader of the Seder hides the afikoman and the children must find it, whereupon they receive a prize or reward. In other homes, the children hide the afikoman and a parent must look for it. When the parents give up, the children demand a prize for revealing its location. Order of the Seder. The order and procedures of the Seder are stated and printed in the text of the Passover Haggadah, a copy of which is in front of all participants. The following words, denoting the order of the Seder, are traditionally recited before anything else is said. Jewish children are often taught this with a rhyme and tune at their Jewish schools. Kadesh. Yericharts. Karpas. Yesharts. Magid. Rechzar. Motzi. Matzah. Ma. Korich. Shulchanorich. Zaphon. Barak. Hillel. Nertzar. In Hebrew. Gigahertz copyright. K. Yen. K. Unregistered trademark, Yen. Unregistered trademark. K. Unregistered trademark. K. Kaish. Ka, Y Kaish. Y. Kaish. AA. K. Equals Kadish equals, Kadish gigahertz copyright is Hebrew imperative for Kaidash. It should be recited as soon as the synagogue services are over but not before nightfall. This Kaidash is similar to that which is recited on all of the 3 pilgrimage festivals, but also refers to Matzot and the Exodus from Egypt. Acting in a way that shows freedom and majesty, many Jews have the custom of filling each other's cups at the Seder table. The Kaidash is traditionally said by the father of the house, but all Seder participants may participate by reciting the Kaidash and drinking at least a majority of the first cup of wine. Yericharts equals, technically, according to Jewish law, whenever one partakes of fruits or vegetables dipped in liquid while remaining wet, one must wash one's hands, if the fruit or vegetable remains wet. However, other times of the year either one has already washed their hands before eating bread, or dry the fruit or vegetable, in which case, one need not wash their hands before eating the fruit or vegetable. According to most traditions, no blessing is recited at this point in the Seder, unlike the blessing recited over the washing of the hands before eating bread. However, followers of Rambam or the Gaon of Vilna do recite a blessing. Karpas equals, each participant dips a vegetable into either salt water, vinegar or caroset. Another custom mentioned in some Ashkenazi sources and probably originating with Mur of Rothenburg, was to dip the karpas in wine. Yesharts equals, 3 matzot are stacked on the Seder table. At this stage, the middle matzah of the 3 is broken in half. The larger piece is hidden, to be used later as the afikoman, the dessert after the meal. The smaller piece is returned to its place between the other 2 matzot. Majid equals, the story of Passover, and the change from slavery to freedom is told. At this point in the Seder, Moroccan Jews have a custom of raising the Seder plate over the heads of all those present while chanting Bivi Liyors Anu Mimt Thrayim, Hulama and Ayab Bnei Horon. halakma anaya. The matzot are uncovered, and referred to as the bread of affliction. Participants declare an invitation to all who are hungry or needy to join in the Seder. Halakha requires that this invitation be repeated in the native language of the country. Ma'anishtana. The Mishnah details questions one is obligated to ask on the night of the Seder. It is customary for the youngest child present to recite the 4 questions. Some customs hold that the other participants recite them quietly to themselves as well. In some families, this means that the requirement remains on an adult child until a grandchild of the family receives sufficient Jewish education to take on the responsibility. If a person has no children capable of asking, the responsibility falls to their spouse, or another participant. The need to ask is so great that even if a person is alone at the Seder they are obligated to ask themselves and to answer their own questions. Ma'anishtana halila hazimikul halilot. Why is this night different from all other nights? Shebka halilot anu oka euro unregistered trademark lina yena meta matzah, vulela has kalo matzah. Why is it that on all other nights during the year we eat either leavened bread or matzah, but on this night we eat only matzah? Shebka halilot anu oka euro unregistered trademark linsha euro unregistered trademark a eurocot, vulela has ma. Why is it that on all other nights we eat all kinds of vegetables, but on this night we eat bitter herbs? Shebka halilot enanu matbilina filupor euro amayenat, vulela has shtuife euro amim. Why is it that on all other nights we do not dip our food even once, but on this night we dip them twice? Shebka halilot anu oka euro unregistered trademark lin ben yosha euro unregistered trademark vanat ven subin, vulela has kulanum subin. Why is it that on all other nights we dine either sitting upright or reclining, but on this night we all recline? The second question substitutes for a different question, present in the Mishnah but removed by later authorities due to its inapplicability after the destruction of the temple. Shebka halilot anu oka euro unregistered trademark lin basat sali shalak unvushal, vulela has kalot sali. Why is it that on all other nights we eat meat either roasted, marinated, or cooked, but on this night it is entirely roasted? Roasted sacrifices were no longer possible after the destruction, and roasted meat was therefore disallowed on Seder night, to avoid ambiguity. The questions are answered with the following: we eat only matzah because our ancestors could not wait for their breads to rise when they were fleeing slavery in Egypt, and so they were flat when they came out of the oven. We eat only ma, a bitter herb, to remind us of the bitterness of slavery that our ancestors endured while in Egypt. The first dip, green vegetables in salt water, symbolizes the replacing of our tears with gratitude, and the second dip, Marinsha roses, symbolizes the sweetening of our burden of bitterness and suffering. We recline at the Seder table because in ancient times, a person who reclined at a meal was a free person, while slaves and servants stood. We eat only roasted meat because that is how the Pesach Passover lamb is prepared during sacrifice in the temple at Jerusalem. The 4 questions have been translated into over 300 languages. The 4 sons. The traditional Haggadah speaks of 4 sons: one who is wise, one who is wicked, one who is simple, and one who does not know to ask. This is based upon the rabbis of the Jerusalem Talmud finding 4 references in the Torah to responding to your son who asks a question. Each of these sons phrases his question about the Seder in a different way. The Haggadah recommends answering each son according to his question, using one of the 3 verses in the Torah that refer to this exchange. The wise son asks, "What are the statutes, the testimonies, and the laws that God has commanded you to do?" One explanation for why this very detailed-oriented question is categorized as wise, is that the wise son is trying to learn how to carry out the Seder, rather than asking for someone else's understanding of its meaning. He is answered fully. You should reply to him with, "All the laws of Pesach, one may not eat any dessert after the Paschal sacrifice." The wicked son, who asks, "What is this service to you?" is characterized by the Haggadah as isolating himself from the Jewish people, standing by objectively and watching their behavior rather than participating. Therefore, he is rebuked by the explanation that it is because God acted for my sake when I left Egypt. Where the 4 sons are illustrated in the Haggadah, This son has frequently been depicted as carrying weapons or wearing stylish contemporary fashions. The simple son, who asks, "What is this?" is answered with a strong hand the Almighty led us out from Egypt, from the house of bondage. And the one who does not know to ask is told, "It is because of what the Almighty did for me when I left Egypt." Some modern Haggadahs mention children instead of sons, and some have added a fifth child. The fifth child can represent the children of the Shu who did not survive to ask a question, or represent Jews who have drifted so far from Jewish life that they do not participate in a Seder. For the former, tradition is to say that for the child we ask, "Why?" And, like the simple child, we have no answer. Go and learn. 4 verses in Deuteronomy are then expounded, with an elaborate, traditional commentary. The Haggadah explores the meaning of those verses, and embellishes the story. This telling describes the slavery of the Jewish people and their miraculous salvation by God. This culminates in an enumeration of the 10 plagues, Dharma all the water was changed to blood, Sephada an infestation of frogs sprang up in Egypt, Kinema the Egyptians were afflicted by lice, Arava an infestation of wild animals sprang up in Egypt, Devra a plague killed off the Egyptian livestock, Shachina an epidemic of boils afflicted the Egyptians, Barada hail rained from the sky, Abha locusts swarmed over Egypt, Choshecha Egypt was covered in darkness, Makhat Bekarota all the firstborn sons of the Egyptians were slain by God, with the recital of the 10 plagues, each participant removes a drop of wine from his or her cup using a fingertip. Although this night is one of salvation, Don Isaac Abravanel explains that one cannot be completely joyous when some of God's creatures had to suffer. A mnemonic acronym for the plagues is also introduced, DTZACH-Bashav, while similarly spilling a drop of wine for each word. At this part in the Seder, songs of praise are sung, including the song Dayenu, which proclaims that had God performed any single one of the many deeds performed for the Jewish people, it would have been enough to obligate us to give thanks. Some sing instead the women's Dayenu, a feminist variant of Dayenu, by Michelle Landsberg. After Dayenu is a declaration of the reasons of the commandments of the Paschal Lamb, Matzah, and Ma, with scriptural sources. Then follows a short prayer, and the recital of the first 2 psalms of Hallel. A long blessing is recited, and the second cup of wine is drunk. Rochtzah the ritual handwashing is repeated, this time with all customs including a blessing. Motzi 2 blessings are recited. First one recites the standard blessing before eating bread, which includes the words, "Who brings forth?" Matzah then one recites the blessing regarding the commandment to eat matzah. An olive-sized piece is then eaten while reclining to the left. Mar the blessing for the eating of the mar is recited and then it is dipped into the caroset and eaten. Korach the mar is placed between 2 small pieces of matzah, similarly to how the contents of a sandwich are placed between 2 slices of bread, and eaten. This follows the tradition of Hillel, who did the same at his Seder table 2,000 years ago. Shulchan Aruch the festive meal is eaten. Traditionally it begins with a charred egg on the Seder plate. In Yiddish, there is a cute saying, unregistered trademark K unregistered trademark Y unregistered trademark copyright Y section Y unregistered trademark copyright, which translated means we set the table and eat the fish. Zafan The afikoman, which was hidden earlier in the Seder, is traditionally the last morsel of food eaten by participants in the Seder. Each participant receives an olive-sized portion of matzah to be eaten as afikoman. After the consumption of the afikoman, traditionally, no other food may be eaten for the rest of the night. Additionally, no intoxicating beverages may be consumed, with the exception of the remaining 2 cups of wine. Barik the recital of Birkat Hamazon. Kos Shlishi, the drinking of the 3rd cup of wine. Note: the 3rd cup is customarily poured before the grace after meals is recited because the 3rd cup also serves as a cup of blessing associated with the grace after meals on special occasions. Kos Shel Navi. Miriam's cup. In many traditions, the front door of the house is opened at this point. Psalm 79 6-7 is recited in both Ashkenazi and Sephardi traditions, plus Lamentations 3:66 among Ashkenazim. Most Ashkenazim have the custom to fill a fifth cup at this point. This relates to our Talmudic discussion that concerns the number of cups that are supposed to be drunk. Given that the 4 cups are in reference to the 4 expressions of redemption in Exodus 6:6-7, some rabbis felt that it was important to include a fifth cup for the 5th expression of redemption in Exodus 6:8. All agreed that 5 cups should be poured, but the question as to whether or not the 5th should be drunk, given that the 5th expression of redemption concerned being brought into the land of Israel, which, by this stage, was no longer possessed of an autonomous Jewish community, remained insoluble. The rabbis determined that the matter should be left until Elijah, and the 5th cup came to be known as the Kos Shel Eliyahu. Over time, people came to relate this cup to the notion that Elijah will visit each home on Seder night as a foreshadowing of his future arrival at the end of the days, when he will come to announce the coming of the Jewish Messiah. Some Seders now set out a cup for the prophet Miriam as well as the traditional cup for the prophet Elijah, sometimes accompanied by a ritual to honor Miriam. Miriam's cup originated in the 1980s in a Boston Rosh Kodesh group. It was invented by Stephanie Liu, who filled it with Mayim Hayim and used it in a feminist ceremony of guided meditation. Miriam's cup is linked to the Midrash of Miriam's well, which is a rabbinic legend that tells of a miraculous well that accompanied the Israelites during their 40 years in the desert at the Exodus from Egypt. Hallel. The entire order of Hallel, which is usually recited in the synagogue on Jewish holidays, is also recited at the Seder table, albeit sitting down. The first 2 Psalms, 113 and 114, were recited before the meal. The remaining Psalms 115 to 118, are recited at this point. Psalm 136 is then recited, followed by Nishmat, a portion of the morning service for Shabbat and festivals. There are a number of opinions concerning the paragraph Yehalakha, which normally follows Hallel, and Ishtabak, which normally follows Nishmat. Most Ashkenazim recite Yehalakha immediately following the Hallel proper, that is at the end of Psalm 118, except for the concluding words. After Nishmat, they recite Ishtabak in its entirety. Sephardim recite Yehalakha alone after Nishmat. Afterwards the 4th cup of wine is drunk and a brief grace for the fruit of the vine is said. Nirtzah. The Seder concludes with a prayer that the night's service be accepted. A hope for the Messiah is expressed, L'shana haba beras halayim. Next year in Jerusalem. Jews in Israel, and especially those in Jerusalem, recite instead L'shana haba beras halayim habnu yor. Next year in the rebuilt Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the holiest city in the Bible. It has become symbolic of the idea of spiritual perfection. The tradition of saying a Euro next year in Jerusalem is similar to the tradition of opening the door for Elijah. It recognizes that a this year we live in an imperfect world outside of a Euro Jerusalem, but we patiently await a time, hopefully a Euro next year, a Euro in which we live in spiritual perfection. Although the 15 orders of the Seder have been complete, the Haggadah concludes with additional songs which further recount the miracles that occurred on this night in ancient Egypt as well as throughout history. Some songs express a prayer that the Beit HaMikdash will soon be rebuilt. The last song to be sung is Haggadah. This seemingly childish song about different animals and people who attempted to punish others for their crimes and were in turn punished themselves, was interpreted by the Vilna Gaon as an allegory to the retribution God will levy over the enemies of the Jewish people at the end of days. Following the Seder, those who are still awake may recite the Song of Songs, engage in Torah learning, or continue talking about the events of the Exodus until sleep overtakes them. Non-traditional Seders. Feminist Seders. In 1976, the first women-only Passover Seder was held in Esther M. Broner's New York City apartment and led by her, with 13 women attending, including Gloria Steinem, Letty Kontin Pogbin, and Phyllis Chesler. Esther Broner and Naomi Nimrod created a women's Haggadah for use at this Seder. In the spring of 1976, Esther Brona published this OE Women unregistered trademark S Haggadah in Miss magazine, later publishing it as a book in 1994. This Haggadah is meant to include women where only men had been mentioned in traditional Haggadahs, and it features the wise women, the four daughters, the women unregistered trademark S questions, the women unregistered trademark S plagues, and a women-centric OE Day Euro. The original Women's Seder has been held with a Women's Haggadah every year since 1976, and women-only Seders are now held by some congregations as well. Some Seders now set out a cup for the prophet Miriam as well as the traditional cup for the prophet Elijah, sometimes accompanied by a ritual to honor Miriam. Miriam's cup originated in the 1980s in a Boston Rosh Kodesh group. It was invented by Stephanie Liu, who filled it with Mayim Hayim and used it in a feminist ceremony of guided meditation. Miriam's cup is linked to the Midrash of Miriam's well, which is a rabbinic legend that tells of a miraculous well that accompanied the Israelites during their 40 years in the desert at the Exodus from Egypt. Furthermore, some Jews include an orange on the Seder plate. The orange represents the fruitfulness for all Jews when all marginalized peoples are included, particularly women and gay people. An incorrect but common rumor says that this tradition began when a man told Susanna Heschel that a woman belongs on the bima as an orange on the Seder plate. However, it actually began in the early 1980s, when speaking at Oberlin College Hillel, Susanna Heschel was introduced to an early feminist Haggadah that suggested adding a crust of bread on the Seder plate, as a sign of solidarity with Jewish lesbians. Heschel felt that to put bread on the Seder plate would be to accept that Jewish lesbians and gay men violate Judaism like chametz violates Passover. So, at her next Seder, she chose an orange as a symbol of inclusion of gays and lesbians and others who are marginalized within the Jewish community. In addition, each orange segment had a few seeds that had to be spit out, a gesture of spitting out and repudiating the homophobia of traditional Judaism. Furthermore, many Haggadah now use gender-neutral English translations. Public Seders the group of people who hold a Passover Seder together is referred to in the Talmud as a chavira. In the Far East, for example, Chabad Lubavitch emissaries regularly conduct Seders for hundreds of visiting students, business people and Jewish travelers. The Chabad Seder in Kathmandu regularly attracts more than 1,200 participants. In 2006, the Federation of Jewish Communities of the CIS and Baltic countries organized over 500 public Seders throughout the former Soviet Union, led by local rabbis and Chabad rabbinical students, drawing more than 150,000 attendees in total. In Israel, where permanent residents observe only one Seder, overseas students learning in yeshivas and women's seminaries are often invited in groups up to 100 for second-day Seders hosted by outreach organizations and private individuals. Messianic Seders Messianic Jews celebrate a form of Passover by observing some or all of the traditional observances, but adding additional readings or sacraments found in Christianity and Messianic Judaism. Additional readings may be from the New Testament, Messianic prophecies such as those found in Isaiah, or prayers containing Messianic elements. Additionally, the Zafan and the third cup of wine are sometimes done in conjunction with communion, citing that Jesus instituted communion right after dinner, which is where the eating of the afikomen and drinking of the third cup takes place in a traditional Seder. There are various Messianic Haggadahs used to perform a Seder in the traditional family setting, at a Messianic congregation, at a church for explaining Passover to Gentiles, or in a public setting for all to attend. Christian Seders Some Christians, especially but not only evangelical Protestants, have recently taken great interest in performing Seders according to the ancient rubric. Many churches host Seders, usually adding a Christian message, and many times inviting Messianic Jews to lead and teach on it. Many Christians cite the meal as a way to connect with the heritage of their own religion and to see how the practices of the ancient world are still relevant to Christianity today. Interfaith Seders A number of churches hold interfaith Seders where Jews and non-Jews alike are invited to share in the story and discuss common themes of peace, freedom, and religious tolerance. It should be noted these themes are only peripherally referenced in a traditional Jewish Seder. During the American Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s, interfaith Seders energized and inspired leaders from various communities who came together to march for equal protection for all. The first of these, the Freedom Seder, was written by Arthur Wasco, published in Ramparts magazine and in a small booklet by the Mika Press and in a later edition by Holt Reinhardt Winston, and was actually performed on April 4, 1969, the first anniversary of the death of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. and the third night of Passover, at Lincoln Memorial Temple in Washington, D.C. It celebrated the liberation struggle of Black America alongside that of ancient Israel from Pharaoh, and was the first Haggadah to go beyond the original biblical story. It sparked a large number of Haggadahs celebrating various other forms of liberation: Eurofeminism, vegetarianism, the liberation movements in Latin America in the 1970s, ecological healing, etc. Today, many Unitarian Universalist congregations hold annual interfaith community Seders. A number of interfaith Passover Seder Haggadahs have been written especially for this purpose. See also, Jewish cuisine, Last Supper. References. External links: Was Jesus' Last Supper a Seder? Biblical Archaeology Society, Seder Haggadah with Hebrew and English Prayers Student Reader.